a lot of questions from you about this war, and it is a widespread war, and so there are a lot of questions. There are people trapped abroad. There are people concerned about family in many of the countries that are involved in this or impacted by it. We are lucky to have Janice Stein here to help answer some of the questions. She's the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Janice, good day to you.
Good day to you, David. It's not a very quiet day where you are.
It certainly is not. I want to ask Janice, we have a lot of questions, as I say, but I wanted to sort of do some big picture things with you very quickly first. Lebanon, 500,000 people on the run, a country that has seen war before, has seen displacement. It is back at it this morning. Do you find great concern about this latest chapter in the long-running war between Hezbollah and Israel?
You know, I really am concerned because as this widens, it affects the civilian population. As you say, people on the move, sheltering in place without homes. This is about the struggle with Hezbollah, both by Israel and the Lebanese government, which has finally said to Hezbollah, you must disarm. Hezbollah is not only in the south, but it has its headquarters in Beirut, and those are the target of the strikes. But beyond a certain point, David, these strikes don't achieve a political purpose because they actually antagonize the broader population of Lebanon. Lebanese do not want to be dragged into this war. They have said this repeatedly. So their anger is at Hezbollah. But after a certain point, given the extent of the displacement, the fury turns, in fact, on the attack.
I want to turn to Iran. Iran has been firing huge numbers of missiles and drones at Persian Gulf nations, at U.S. forces, at U.S. bases. And the Washington Post, Janice, is reporting today that it is being told where all those Americans are by the Russians. Should we be surprised by any of that?
No. David, first of all, you know, the Russians will have satellite intelligence that the Iranians do not. And it's not surprising because the Russians have done actually very little for their so-called ally. But just remember, for comparison, that the Americans had a base in Germany where they were supplying up-to-the-minute intelligence to Ukraine, state-of-the-art intelligence information, which actually involved targeting information. So this is not a new or surprising development, frankly. It certainly will antagonize the president, and that's not that's not nothing here, David, because of the Ukraine context in which this happens. Russia's gambling because Putin has worked hard to preserve his relationship with Trump. This will certainly annoy him.
Okay, let's get to some of our viewer questions. Jason Beale writing, if the Iranian people are not armed, how exactly are they supposed to rise up?
Great question. And you just had on your broadcast, David, the text messages that Iranians are getting on their cell phones. Do not go out into the street. You know, we will react with great harshness. That's just code for we will shoot. There are besieged checkpoints in the city. So the notion that there can be a civilian uprising as long as there are armed militias in the street is not real. The only way a civilian uprising happens is if there is an internal break. And the Revolutionary Guards split, and then civilians could have an opportunity. But under the circumstances, I think Jason is exactly right. Not going to happen that way.
Okay, here's a question from Raymond Paquet, who says, why would Canada get involved when the USA doesn't really need our help right now?
Yeah. You know, there's been a lot of conversation since the Prime Minister's latest clarification, and then it went, as you reported, to our CDS, Jenny Carignan. Frankly, Canada's not going to get involved militarily in the real meaning of it. Could we help? Could we use our military in the event of some emergency evacuation? Yes. Could we supply equipment that we may have that an ally might be short of? Yes. But in terms of meaningful military involvement in the way the Canadian public understands it, I think the prospects of that are close to nil, Dave.
Okay, I want to turn to a question Chris Douglas wrote to us. If any of the NATO countries, Turkey, for instance, gets hit by a missile fired from Iran, and this has happened, would that trigger Article 5? It hasn't to this point, but what would it take?
Article 5 is the article within our NATO treaty, which says that if one, and it's really interesting wording, if one member is attacked, David, other members should come to its assistance. Look how much room there is for maneuver in that one. Turkey would have to ask for help under the NATO treaty. It has not, and until it does, Article 5 is not relevant. And just for Chris, Article 5 has only been invoked once in NATO's history, once. And that was after 9/11 when the United States invoked. So again, not high on the probability list.
All right, let me turn to a question from Mary McKay, who's saying, Iran's constitution stipulates the supreme leader must be a cleric, an ayatollah. How can its citizens or anyone else actually bring about any viable regime change?
Well, in the event of a breakdown of the regime, that constitution would no longer be binding. So that's how that would work. But there's a really interesting story here because you reported earlier, David, that Moshtaba Khamenei, the son of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in a virtual meeting of the Assembly of Experts who are constitutionally mandated to choose the leader, was the clear favorite. Interestingly enough, his son is not an Ayatollah. It would be very, very unusual. He doesn't have the religious standing that his father did. And the supreme leader is the supreme leader because of his religious authority. So what this tells you is that the Revolutionary Guard put tremendous pressure on those who were voting virtually because he has close relationships with the Revolutionary Guard. I'm not sure the story is over there, David, because of that.
Janice, you are not an expert on maritime law, I know, but I'm going to throw something out to you relating to the sinking the sinking of the Iranian warship, likely more than 100 Iranian sailors dead on a vessel the Iranians at least claim was unarmed. And the question is from John Heenan, who says, did the U.S. Navy commit two different war crimes by sinking the Iranian warship, sinking a ship in international waters without first declaring war, and not rendering aid to enemy combatants once the ship was sunk? You may not know the exact answers to this, Janice, but I would be keen to hear your thoughts.
I think I do, David, because this all hinges on whether there was a declaration of war, which there has been no formal declaration of war. But if you look at the last 30 years, longer in fact, declarations of war, even when countries go to war, are increasingly rare. So, international law, which is the core of all of this, and has evolved over time, has not kept up with the changing practices. It's hard to think, of the last time there was a formal declaration of war. Governments use words like special military operation, all this sort of thing. In this case, there's not only a question of whether this war is legal or not internationally, likely not, but beyond that, whether the President of the United States has gotten the appropriate, congressional approvals. He's briefed Congress, but we saw Congress just yesterday refused to pass any changes to the war powers legislation, which would restrict his ability to do this. So if Congress did that, it's probably constitutional in the United States then, until it's reviewed by the courts. So there's a murky business here because practice is increasingly inconsistent with the law for the last 3 decades.
Well, and I want to expand on that because we got a lot of emails from people watching asking about whether this action that Israel and the U.S. are conducting is legal. So let me unpack a little bit of it for us, because we've heard the Prime Minister in his speech in Davos talking about the end of the rules-based order, and that is essentially that countries followed rules simply because rules existed, but there wasn't necessarily a way for those rules to be enforced. So let's say someone determines that this action is not according with international law. Does it matter? Does anything happen?
They really can't do much about it, right? So what could they conceivably do? They could, if it's a government that makes the determination, they could take it to the Security Council. Even if they're not a member, they could take it to the Security Council. The United States has a veto there. That would not have any impact. They could take it to the International Court of Justice. Well, in fact, the International Court of Justice only rules on disputes between states when parties come to the court. There's an International Criminal Court, David. That's for individuals who commit war crimes that violate international law. So even if, and there clearly are international lawyers who are saying very loudly, and in my view correctly, that this war is not legal, they would have a very difficult case in front of any relevant institution. And I guess what I'm really saying is there's a flip side to this, David, that when law diverges from practice, it doesn't matter if it's domestic law or international law. When the gap grows very, very wide, usually law has to catch up.
Janice, last question to you relates to the many Canadians who are stranded abroad, who are stuck in this region, who have been unable to get out. We're seeing some now getting out, but every single time there is something like this, and this one's huge, but Port of Vallarta, we heard the same thing, Lebanon in the past, every single time one of these things happens, we hear from people who say, why doesn't the Canadian government send rescue flights? Why aren't we hearing something like that? And many people get dissatisfied or frustrated by the response from the federal government. I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
I do. Again, first of all, we're in a catch-22 here, but I think some things can be done much better, David. I really do. So let's start at the beginning. The government issues an alert and says to Canadians, get out while there are still commercial flights. They did that. People need to take that much more seriously and understand that once airspace is closed, it is very difficult to charter planes, whether they're Canada planes or not, land those on airfields, and get large numbers of people out. So there is a responsibility that Canadians have to stay alert, and when you get those messages, go. But here's what Global Affairs can do much better. People are having trouble registering with embassies. Why? Right? Some of the sites are crashing. That happened in Port of Vallarta as well. It took hours to register. There is much better technology now that we have, which would make it easy to do two things. One, for Canadians to register really quickly and seamlessly where they are using technology. And that's really important because then government knows where Canadians are and can push out messages to them when it is possible to evacuate, and can also help them move from one area to another if one is less dangerous than the other. Other countries do this better than we do. We need to get better at providing virtual information in real time to people where they are in a crisis. Because I'm hearing from Canadians too.
I imagine you are. We're
I
hearing from a
am.
lot, and we'll
Yeah.
keep you up. I mean, look, we are hearing from the federal the foreign affairs minister coming up in about 25 minutes time. We're going to carry it live for people here on CBC News Network, and
Good.
hopefully Anita Anand will provide more information. But look, I appreciate your time, Janice, helping us answer some of the many questions about this ever-expanding war. Appreciate it.
It is. And you and your team stay safe as you move around the region.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Janice.